Hello, and welcome to this video from the Bible and beyond. We explore historical and spiritual questions about Jesus, gender, women, salvation, healing, and the meaning of life. Shirley Paulson is hosting a series of conversations by podcast and video with scholars who are able to unlock mysteries from extra-canonical books, forgotten scriptures, so-called Gnostic Gospels, and the Bible.
I'm very happy to welcome back Dr. Kateusz, who's a colleague and friend whose work centers on the intersection of gender and early Christianity. She's a research associate at Wingard's Institute for Catholic Research in London and has published 2 books and 3 important articles on Mary in early Christian traditions. If you remember her vlog of June 2019, I know you'll be eager to see what she has to show us today. To find our bearings with ancient Christian art, Ali is going to teach us a little about how to see what we're looking for. Her discoveries of the development of gender politics during the first few centuries after Jesus are quite a surprise. It's a remarkable story that teaches through art, where pictures are still worth 1,000 words. Ali, thanks so much for taking us on this tour with you.
You're very welcome. I'm really delighted to be here. So thank you for asking me back. I think it's going to be fun to show this art.
Looking forward to it. What do you have to show us then?
Well, okay, let's just start with an introduction to early Christian art, because when I first started looking at early Christian art, I found it very difficult to understand even who Jesus was in some of these scenes. So and who was a woman, who wasn't a woman. And so let's just take a look at it. I'll go through this, and then I'll go through some examples that kind of show the gender politics that were going on as well. So most of these examples, the ones right here that I'm going to go through right now, all of them are from the 200s and 300s. They're early Christian sarcophagi. So I've chosen early Christian sarcophagi because sculptors really beautifully carved on the marble and some other stones that they used to make these tombs for the dead. Usually it would be wealthy dead who could afford a tomb like this, not the poor. But they have very elaborate and beautiful scenes on them. And so people want to know, how can I identify Jesus in early art? And there are 3 basic ways. First, Jesus was often depicted with kind of a wand or maybe a staff. Maybe he was being likened to Moses, who had a staff. And you usually see this wand, not always with him, but you see it when he's performing a miracle. So it's kind of like a magician's wand, some scholars call it. So you can see over here on the right, you've got his wand or staff. These are both pictures of Jesus. They're scenes with Jesus. And here you've got these little baskets and these little bitty breads with a cross on them inside of it. And he's got the staff, and it seems to be the multiplication of the loaves. And over here, same thing. He's got a staff. And he's got these 3 jugs down here, which would be perhaps changing the water into the wine or multiplying wine. So
most of these are Jesus then, is that right?
These 2, these 2 scenes, yes, are Jesus on the left and Jesus on the right. So they're 2 scenes of Jesus performing kind of a Eucharistic miracles.
Okay, then we see 2 Jesuses, and of course I'm curious about the woman, but I suppose you'll talk about her later?
Yes, I will talk about her later.
All right.
Yes,
so
it's one of the most provocative figures and least understood figures in early Christian art is the woman in the center here with her arms raised.
Okay, but we're looking so we're looking at the staff right now with Jesus holding these.
Yes, so this is one way to identify Jesus.
Okay, then. Okay.
Another way is that before around the year 380, Jesus was almost always depicted beardless. So today we see him with a beard, but in those days, he was typically seen without a beard. So when you see a fellow who's doing a miracle, like here he's healing the lame man who picked up his bed and carried it on his back, you see he doesn't have a wand here, but he's beardless. And you know, he's in the center of the scene, whereas here's some beardless guys too, but these guys have beards. They're kind of in the front part. But so there's a big comparison to Jesus, who's not beardless, does not have facial hair. And the third way is that Jesus was usually depicted with longer hair than the men around him. So, actually, you know what? We can go back to this one and see his long hair.
Yes.
And, you know, this guy has a little bit of longish hair, but nowhere near as long as Jesus does. And same way with this guy back in the back.
Well, we lost that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the mouse is doing its own little activity here. Okay. The fellow in the back is beardless, but he has short hair. So he's not Jesus in this case. So, and he's in the background as well. So here's another scene. We've got Jesus, and here he's no beard, long hair, and he's standing before Pontius Pilate. And that's the scene we're looking at here. And Pontius Pilate's washing his hands in that bowl. And so there's a couple of, you know, Pontius Pilate doesn't have long hair. He's beardless, but he doesn't have long hair. He's centered, you know, he's featured, but he's, the long hair is distinctive here.
So I have to say then that Jesus is looking kind of different from what we've seen in the art I'm more used to. Is that right?
Well, today we're used to seeing him with a beard, but we still see him almost always with long hair. So the long hair is something that has carried over from the very earliest Christian art. We still see that, but around 380, we started seeing him almost, not invariably by any means, but especially around Rome. In the West, we would see him more and more with a beard.
Yeah. Okay.
So more manly Jesus.
Right. Okay. But the early ones, he looks kind of different to us. Okay. We'll get used to this.
Yes. So here his hair isn't as long, but we have two scenes again. And the scene that we looked at before where he's got the wand and miracles of the bread and the wine. And his hair is not as long as in the previous two examples, but it's longer than the man next to him.
Okay.
So sometimes the men next to him are used as sort of illustrative ways of identifying Jesus. So one guy has a beard, one guy doesn't, but nonetheless, both of these fellows next to Jesus are depicted with really short cropped hair.
Okay.
So how to identify a woman in early Christian art? Because if we look at it, Jesus, sometimes I used to think this was a woman when I first started looking at early Christian art. It was kind of difficult to tell. So women usually have longer dresses, not invariably, but almost always.
Okay.
So here you can see she's got a very long dress here. And she has breasts, it seems, and she's quite feminine. Also, before Constantine, and there's very few sarcophagi that date before Constantine.
Okay.
Before around 315 or the late 200s. But sometimes you would find women who were depicted with short hair and without veils. For example, this woman, this is from maybe the 250s to 280s, a very, very old sarcophagus, but it has a lot of Christian elements to it, like the sheep and the full sarcophagus has more. And after Constantine, almost all artists depicted Christian women with veils.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So there's change going on historically. I'm getting it. Okay. Right.
I mean, if we go back and say, okay, that's going to be before Constantine, because after Constantine, I'm sure there is an example somewhere, but it's exceedingly rare that women were depicted without a veil. For example, here, we know this woman is depicted with a veil, so a head covering. So we know this is after Constantine, and indeed it is. It was created afterwards, or after Constantine arrived anyway. So here we have a really pronounced veil. And on the left, we have Jesus again. And you can see he's beardless. And he looks very feminine, very feminine. beardless, longer hair than the man behind him.
He almost looks like a child, too. Am I right?
He does. He looks, yes, he doesn't look manly like a grown man, you know, with a, all muscular and bearded, and his posture isn't even manly. Yeah.
But she reveres him. Okay, I get it.
So how can you, a lot of times we look at these scenes of Jesus on a sarcophagus and it's really hard to tell initially what's going on. But if you just pay very close attention to the details, you can recognize a lot of the iconography. So for example, here we've got, again, Jesus with the long hair, no beard, a staff. He's changing jugs of water into wine. And he's also got his hand on a boy. So he's healing or raising a boy from the dead, hard to say. Here he's got a scroll, perhaps a scroll of the law in his left hand, but his right hand, again, the wand and the little, here's 5 baskets with the little pieces of bread in them. Here he's healing the blind man. So his fingers are on the man's eyes.
So is it right that he tends to make the people who are healed are people who are much smaller?
This is one of the phenomenons of early Christian, or not just early Christian art. This is one of the sort of ways that people were depicted in or all around the Mediterranean. The important people were human-sized, but the less important people were small, made small.
Okay.
So, and a lot of time you'll see women and children are very small, whereas the men will be big. And there are some important exceptions to that in early Christian art. Here we have you can see the cock, the rooster down here. This might be Peter in the background. It's kind of the way Peter's often depicted, with kind of curly hair and a beard. And so that might be Jesus and the Peter and the cock that crowed is usually how that's interpreted. And here you have a scene of Lazarus as kind of a little mummy in a tomb. Mary fell at his feet here. And so this is the raising of Lazarus. Here we have the baby in the manger with the ox and the donkey overlooking him, which is from apocryphal gospel, extra canonical gospel. Not the actual. It's very, very popular in early Christian art. In fact, when you see the manger, you virtually always see the donkey and the ox. So it makes you wonder what early Christians were reading. Apparently, they were reading the story called the Proto-Vangelium about the birth of Jesus, and not the actual canonical gospels.
Okay, that's a surprise, but thank you. Okay.
Here you have, looks like the woman, she's got a veil touching his hem, the woman with the issue of blood. Here you have a scene of Abraham, who's got a knife in one hand and his hand on the boy, his son, usually thought to be a scene of Abraham about to sacrifice his son. Moses getting the law from God, who's, just a hand coming down with the law. And this was the tomb of a man named Claudiano. And this tells a little bit about Claudiano and gives some dating. And this is actually a portrait of Claudiano. So some of the scenes are not, as I was describing up here, some of the scenes are from extra canonical gospels, like this one from the Proto-Vangelium, which specifies that Mary was riding a donkey, and it was there. The manger was an ox manger, an ox trough or an ox feeder for an ox. So that's where you get in the cave where it says that Jesus was born or Mary gave birth. So that's where you get the ox and the donkey. Mary was on one, and the other one was the manger for the. So some scenes are less well known to us, and here's a couple more. An apostle was arrested, and those again are from the extra canonical text. And there's also when the apostle baptized his jailers, which is probably a story related to Peter. You can see he's using a little staff up here. and the water's coming down to his two jailers.
Okay.
And the female figure that you asked about.
Yes.
Yes.
There she is again.
Yes. There's absolutely no agreement on who the female figure is. And we find this throughout the catacombs. There are many, many, many depictions of women with their arms raised in Christian catacombs of Rome, and very, very few of men. But there's no agreement about what this means, which is really interesting because, art historians who in previous centuries were almost always men, they were looking for sayings that were the Gospels and showed the apostles and Jesus and maybe the men from Scripture. But there's absolutely no agreement on who this woman, who's often a very central figure, represented. Some people call her an allegory, which is typical. Graydon F. Snyder, who wrote about early Christian art, said that in the Christian culture that emerged about 180 CE, no symbol occurs more frequently and integrally than this female figure with lifted arms.
So let me just ask you the word orant. Can you explain what that word is, orant?
That means like a praying person. So they're calling this a praying person. Now, in some cases, we might say this was a liturgical posture, where a priest is raising his hands. And it's really interesting here. She's raising her hands between the wine and the bread, which is fairly Eucharistic in terms of how we might interpret the scene.
Okay.
But this is an orant. The way she is identified now is as an orant, which means a praying figure.
Okay.
And there are some men, like Noah sometimes is depicted with his arms raised. Okay. But he's always wearing female clothing.
You said Noah?
So Noah is depicted with his arms raised in the ark, but wearing female clothing. So this posture in catacomb art is really associated with women, the female.
Okay. One more mystery. Thank you.
Yeah. You want some mystery, but I'm trying to clear up some mystery.
Yes, you are.
While offering you more.
Right.
So Snyder said she must be the most important symbol in early Christian art. So she's a symbol.
That's fascinating. She's a symbol, but she's important.
Right. And some people call her the dead woman or the, allegory is anything but, being able to identify who she might be. Karen Jo Torstensen says, although male figures are occasionally found in this traditional posture, the overwhelming number of orants are female. And she says this figure is evidence of the earliest tradition of women preachers. Which, given some of these positions, I would say that makes sense. Certainly, it seems to be someone who's, if a real person, would have been someone who was with Jesus during his miracles and healings, because in the center of all these scenes. Some say she's the symbol of piety.
Is that because she's
the symbol of the church?
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, who knows? This is one of the big ones that still got to be understood.
Okay.
Symbol of the soul. So she's symbol
of what we want. Okay.
Or often she's identified as a portrait of a dead woman.
Oh no!
Really commonly to say, well, she's the dead woman. Might not even say she's the orant. She's just the difunta, the dead woman. But here, she's definitely not the dead woman because she's on the tomb of a man and there's already a portrait of that man. So it's not the portrait of a dead woman. Not that in some cases she couldn't also be depicted or sculpted as a woman who was buried in one of these tombs. In the 1800s, some researchers suggested early Christians knew her as Mary. I know of one modern researcher who has suggested she could be Mary Magdalene.
Okay, that surprises us too then, doesn't it? Okay.
Other researchers said that was ridiculous.
Okay.
Must be a symbol. Or a dead woman. So, the question I always ask is, so who or what do you think this female figure in the center of these biblical scenes depicted? And there's so many of them.
So you showed us lots of things we can understand, but then you left us with a great big question. I get it.
Here she is again.
Oh, right in the middle.
And we saw this, and here's the whole sarcophagus. We saw the center scenes earlier.
Wow.
And again. And this also is the tomb of a man named Sabinus. So another tomb of a man.
So they keep putting her in the center, even in different depictions of things. She's still in the center.
Right. So, for example, here, it's a scene of Jesus with the
wine,
jugs of wine. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And here he's healing a boy, and his hair is not quite as long here as in some of the scenes, but it's nice and curly, and he's no beard. And I would say it's a little bit more cropped there, but this is one of there are some where it's shorter. So it's almost like you've got two traditions for Jesus, long hair and short hair, and long hair won. So long hair was a very strong one, because we still see Jesus with long hair. You really just don't see Jesus looking like a guy on Madison Avenue, So. Again, here she is. This is on a double sarcophagus, and that would be Jesus above her, identified as Jesus above her.
Double sarcophagus means that there's 2 layers of it? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, yes. 2 layers of scenes, and sometimes maybe 2 people were laid to rest in it.
Oh, okay.
So these are some scenes with Jesus also.
Okay.
The woman touching his hem. Not sure which scene that is.
So does she, when she's in the center, does she ever do anything besides keeping your hands up in an around position?
Occasionally. I think I may have one like that here. Let's see. Well, here's another one in the arms raised position.
Mm-hmm.
Here's yet another. And I often find this interesting because I see her over here again. It looks to me like she has this collar, which is really interesting. But over here, and she doesn't over here, but her hair is very much like that. This is one of the ones that I used to think, is that a woman? Because here you have the short hair, and here you have Jesus with long hair. And he's got his staff, and, he's multiplying the wine. Again, the short, beardless, shorter haired, long haired Jesus. Looks the same here. This one is a pre-Constantinian sarcophagus. You've got the Orant woman who doesn't have a veil. Let's see here. Oh, and here's another one with her arms raised, but I know there's at least one in here that she's holding whoops, I'm wrong. Okay, so yes, there are some that she's holding a book or something like that, or a scroll. Mm-hmm. And I thought I had one in here, but I think I was focused on the arms raised women. Mm-hmm. So, but yes, to answer your question, there are.
Yeah.
So why do you think it is only the woman whose name we do not know? So
that's a leading question, Ellie.
Yes, I guess. I mean, I don't have maybe because I would say, well, it's because she's the woman, there's kind of we lose track of the women.
Yeah.
Let's see. Would you like to see some more?
Yes, let's go. Let's do a little more here.
Okay. I have a couple of examples here. Here's Mary and the woman at the raising of Lazarus. This is a really early pre-Constantinian sarcophagus. So the raising of Lazarus, John 11, 1 through 45. This is the Jonas Sarcophagus. And so scenes of early Christian scenes are very rare in early Christian art before Constantine. You see more scenes from scripture, from Jewish scripture. So here's the scene that we're going to be looking at on this very early sarcophagus.
And Jonas means Jonah?
Yes. Jonah, as in Jonah in the well. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, so here's the, speaking of, there's the, he's being thrown overboard. And so that's why it's called the Jonas sarcophagus. This doesn't really look like a whale. It looks more like a sea monster. Mm-hmm. And he's, kind of regurgitated. So we have Jesus, who's in the center, pointing at Lazarus, who's wrapped up like a little mummy in the doorway of his tomb. Mm-hmm. And we have another man who stands wearing a short toga behind Jesus. Now, some of the faces are reconstructed, and you can tell which ones were reconstructed by the Vatican and some are not. 3 women also appear to be with Jesus. So we've got 3 men in the scene and 3 women. So Mary, the Gospel of John says, fell at his feet when he came. A woman stands behind Mary. Both sculptors appear to have sculpted both women with long skirts. Mm-hmm. The woman standing behind Mary could be identified as Martha, but I'm not 100% sure that at this time that was identified as Martha, maybe some other woman, because a scholar named Elizabeth Schrader has done some work on the very oldest Gospel of John, which indicates that the name Maria in the scribe changed Maria, M-A-R-I-A, to Martha, M-A-R, T-H-A.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So at least in that very old manuscript, and there's a continuing sequence of some changes that were made in the text or variations in the text. But here we can see that there's a woman standing behind Mary and usually identified as Martha by that time.
And so Mary's on the ground? Mary's kneeling?
Yes, because she fell at his feet according to the gospel. So this is always identified as Mary of Lazarus' sister. The sculptor did not depict them with head coverings, these 2. Mm-hmm. But this woman, the 3rd woman, has a long Greek chiton and a head covering. And you can see even though her face wasn't reconstructed, you can see the bits of the head covering just kind of coming down there from her.
And what is a long Greek chiton?
It's a Greek garment.
Okay.
And so she may have looked, so her arms are lost. So she may have looked very much like this. If you see, she's got the bent knee and a bent knee. She's got similar clothing. She had a bit of a head covering. So quite likely, I think her lost arms were broken. And originally she was an Orant in this scene, an Orant woman. So the sculptor depicted 3 men and 3 women. So it's got a remarkable gender scene, a gospel scene with gender balance in it.
Yes.
So this one's dated late 3rd century, around 280, and there's very, very few of these.
Yes.
This is the most complex scene of the raising of Lazarus in early Christian art. And if we take a look at later scenes after Constantine, then the 2 of the women in the scene disappear.
Okay.
And we see only Mary.
Oh, okay.
She always wears a head covering.
Mm-hmm.
And she seems to kind of shrink.
Well, who's the other shrunken boy next to them?
Perhaps the boy raised from the dead or a boy he healed.
Okay.
We see a boy there again. Yeah.
Yes.
So she's the size of a boy, a child.
Yes, even smaller. My goodness, she's shrinking. And Jesus is growing.
Well, Jesus is full size, yes. And there's not necessarily a sequence through time. This isn't necessarily sequential, but I put them in this order because it really shows what some sculptors were doing in terms of how they were depicting a woman, a really important woman named in the Gospels, and described what she did after Constantine, around after 315, 325.
She looks a bit like the way Mary has been described as Mary Magdalene, a repentant whore of many years later when she's in that looking that way. But that's I never would have thought of them as the same person. But that's an interesting. Okay.
Yep. So it's pretty kind of sad, really.
Wow, she's almost disappearing there.
Yeah, and in some she's just not there. So we're just left with Jesus and Lazarus, which is not uncommon either by then, especially. So what was happening to Mary?
Oh,
who knows? It's obviously something was happening in terms of people, the way people were thinking, or sculptors were told to portray Mary. So back to the gospel before Constantine, and we have 3 men and 3 women. The women are all the same size as Jesus.
Yeah.
They're standing shoulder to shoulder with Jesus. It's really quite striking. If
That
you
is-
like.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, that's a remarkable series of images to show us how you can do, now that you've explained to us how we can pick out who's who, we can see the difference in the way they're being expressed. That's very helpful, Allie.
Right.
Yeah.
How they're represented.
Yeah.
And they represent their ideals for their gospel men and women, their ideals for men and women of that time.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Allie, for this remarkable walk through history. And I just think it's really amazing that the way art seems to hold on to a story long after the words about them have shifted so fluidly. Your message about gender politics and antiquity kind of sticks in our mind now, I think, with these images.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to just make sure that our listeners know that they can find you and your works on your website, alliekateusz.org. Would you spell your last name for us, please?
Kateusz.
All right. So alliekateusz.org. We can find you on the website. And what else do we find on your website, Allie?
You'll find a number of these slideshows. These are just a couple that we have gone through, but there's more that show even more of the gender politics, especially around women.
That's just fascinating.
You can just look at them at your leisure.
And so you have the little descriptions that go along with it. So that's
yeah. So they're intended to be self-explanatory as you go through them.
Yeah, right. Well, you have whetted our appetite. I'm thrilled that you got to do this for us again, Allie. And thank you so much. We'll be back with you again, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Be sure to check out the details on this video from the show notes on the website earlychristiantext.com, or just come browse around on the website to find all the other resources provided for you there. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave comments or questions on the Facebook page at Early Christian Texts, or tweet about it at Early XIAN Texts. And be sure to watch for more videos on Early Christian Texts, the Bible, and beyond.